Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Propaganda Podcast, hosted by the Moral Economy. This is our third season. I'm one of your hosts, Eddie.
I'm another one of your hosts, Andrew.
I'm another one of them, Navaz.
I'm yet another one of them, Franz.
And I'm a co-host, Chell.
If you've been following our other seasons, we were just known as the Moral Economy. We've changed it to Propaganda by the Moral Economy. The reason for that is because, well, there are a few reasons. One of them is because we feel that following the propaganda model by Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky, the propaganda model, we feel that what we're doing, or at least what we're attempting to do, is to get the news, what we feel is propaganda, and we try to cut through it, try to understand it in a deeper way. Secondly, we feel that historically words have been manipulated through time and through power for political purposes. And so we're trying to recapture the word propaganda and reuse it for our own purposes. And lastly, because we just think it's a sexy sounding name and it's enticing. And so you're probably listening to us because you saw propaganda and you thought, what the hell is this? Yeah. Also, we've changed the structure of our podcast. We'll start off with what we call our GPS, our global political situation, run down through the headlines. We're going to analyze it, again, trying to cut through the propaganda. And lastly, we'll go through a specific story, a specific analysis by one of the members from the podcast. So with that, does anyone want to...
On the very end, there's morale.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is just our way of, after talking about all of our very important issues that we will be talking about on this podcast, we feel that it's important that we lift morale in ourselves, in society. And so it's a chance for us to have poems, tell stories, or give, philosophical analysis that might not otherwise pass to the podcast.
With that, should we start with the GPS? Who's going to start it off?
Yeah, I'm going to read the headlines. So I'm going to read some headlines. These are the headlines we selected for the today's podcast. Most of it has to do with Syria, which should come as no surprise to anybody listening. So first headline, U.S.-Russian relations in the context of Syria have been in the news a lot. The U.S. has suspended Syrian ceasefire talks with Russia. According to Reuters. Yeah. The United States broke off talks with Russia on Monday on implementing a ceasefire agreement in Syria and accused Moscow of not living up to its commitments under the September 9th deal to halt fighting and ensure aid reached besieged communities. Second, Russia vetoes UN Syrian ceasefire resolution because of calls for a halt to Russian bombing. Russia proposed an alternative resolution, minus the halt to bombing. But it didn't pass. So according to The Guardian, a Russian counter-resolution which omitted the mention of aerial bombardment was voted down with 9 votes against and 4 in favor. And Third, France then called for war crimes investigation against Russia for the Aleppo bombing. According to The Independent, the French foreign minister has said he will ask the International Court of Justice to investigate possible war crimes in Syria. Putin canceled a planned trip to Paris after the Kremlin accused France of trying to humiliate the Russian leader. This came hours after the French President François Hollande asked that Russia face war crimes charges over its bombardment of Aleppo in the Syrian conflict. Putin told French TV, not entirely inaccurately, "I believe deeply that some of the responsibility for what is happening in the region in general and in Syria in particular lies especially with our Western partners, above all the US and its allies, including the main European countries." And finally, sources indicate that Russia has established a no-fly zone in Syria. This is especially important given Hillary's ongoing commitment to establishing a US-enforced no-fly zone, and raises the question, does she want war with Russia? Russia has also built up its forces in Syria since the ceasefire collapsed in late November. Along these lines, in the latest, according to The Guardian, an unexpected round of multilateral talks on the future of Syria is to start on Saturday, involving initially Russia, the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and possibly Qatar. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said the talks will be held in Lausanne and will exclude the UK, France, and other European states. It is unclear, even with the inclusion of these other European states, how talks between these states could end up with anything good.
That was my own little bit.
I saw it. It's good. And am I reading this one here?
You can pass it on.
Yeah, you want to read that? There you go. Which one? The pink one. Yeah.
This comes amidst attempts by the Clinton campaign and the media to smear WikiLeaks for having ties to Russia. Recently, WikiLeaks released yet more emails from the Clinton campaign. According to The Intercept, they show, among other things, that Hillary has repeatedly praised Walmart in her paid speeches, that she acknowledges Saudi financing of terrorist organizations and acts, and that behind closed doors, Clinton appears to sympathize with the investment giant Goldman Sachs, despite Goldman Sachs obstructing democratic proposals for financial reform. The emails are from Hillary Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta's Gmail account and were leaked in the thousands of WikiLeaks over the past week. These emails reveal a strained relationship with the Saudi Arabian government and tensions over their role in the Syrian conflict. Furthermore, according to Democracy Now!, the leaked emails show how Hillary Clinton's campaign struggled to deal with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders' popularity during the primary season. The New York Times then jumps in with the following. In the final weeks of a dizzying presidential campaign, Donald Trump is suddenly embracing an unlikely ally. The document spilling group WikiLeaks, which Republicans denounced when it published classified State Department cables and Pentagon secrets about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. How best to discredit something than to associate it with Donald Trump?
Okay, we're not going to talk about Trump. Everyone talks about him all the time. And it should have been clear many years ago that he is an abhorrent human being. In Haiti, to continue the headlines, in Haiti, the death toll from Hurricane Matthew has topped 1,000. The storm hit a week ago. Many areas have still received no aid. Food and medicine have run out. Authorities are now digging mass graves for those killed by the Category 4 storm. The country is also battling a growing cholera outbreak. United Nations officials say nearly 1 million people are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance, with up to 80% of Haiti's food crops destroyed in some areas. Aid agencies estimate that at least 60,000 people are staying in temporary shelters. Over 2.1 million people have been affected by the storm, with 1.4 million in need of help, according to the UN nations, adding to the fact that there's a scare because so many of the crops have been destroyed that they're going to face pretty soon a famine if they don't get food.
Okay, and with that, interestingly, from the south, we heard the Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte come out against the U.S. and in a pretty harsh way. Yesterday, day before yesterday actually, speaking to the press, President Duterte ordered United States forces out of his country that almost threatened 65 years of military cooperation between the two states. The president of the Philippines promised to dismantle their military alliance with the United States and called and warned Washington not to treat the country like a doormat. And this was a veiled reference to the United States as things in the region take a different shape. And this comes at the heels of increased Western, most notably U.S. criticism for President Duterte's dealing with the drug problem in his country. Since being elected to office, Duterte has ordered a crackdown on drug mafia that has led to killing of almost 3,600 people in the 3 months that he's been president, for which he's been come under harsh criticism from human rights groups and particularly from the U.S. government. And this has led to exchange of words between the governments of the both sides. But this, coming from the president himself yesterday, was a sign of further tension in the region. And also, the BRICS, the 8th BRICS summit kicked off in Goa today. The leaders of the BRICS countries are meeting from the October 13th to 17th, where they plan out, amongst other items, their new development bank and their contingent reserve arrangement that they've thought of to counter mostly Western, in other words, US-dominated global economic infrastructure. Their development bank has already begun its operations in July 2016 with 5 pilot projects that they've kicked off and $200 billion in pledges. So that should be something that we'll keep you posted with as the summit comes to an end.
Yeah, and just for people who might not know, BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And so, as we are called the Propaganda Podcast now, it's important to point out that all of the headlines that we see in the news all the time are propaganda. And that's why we feel that it's important not only to give the headlines, and we've tried to give them in a way that's fair and balanced, but also to give an analysis at the end. And that's what I'm going to go into. We talked about Haiti, and Haiti has recently been hit by Hurricane Matthew, has killed over 1,000 people that we know of, likely many more because Haiti doesn't have the infrastructure to actually find out how many. And 1.4 million people, according to the UN, Ban Ki-moon, are in dire need right now. And there's a real scare, or actually cholera has actually broken out in some areas, and there's scare that it will spread. And we want to point out that all these headlines that we have talked about just now are related to global warming. And you might be wondering, how can that be? These things are happening in Syria, or in the United States, or in Philippines, and so on. They're all spread all over the globe. How is that related to Haiti, and how are all these things then related to global warming? And I would like to point out, well, global warming, it's global. Okay, so, it affects all of us. But also, the causes for global warming are also more or less the same causes for all these problems we have all over the world. These problems are problems of global capitalism. They are problems of our industrialized system exploiting our Earth and spewing greenhouse gases into the air and causing global warming. But although it's global, we have to understand, this is happening at local levels. It's happening all over the world. It's happening in Philippines, it's happening in the United States, in Haiti, in Germany, in Russia, in Syria. All of these local events are what causes global warming altogether. And then we see, and we compare this to all the problems that we're having all over the world. All these small local events which the media presents as isolated, as if what's happening in Syria has nothing to do with what's happening in the United States, as if what's happening in the Philippines has nothing to do with what's happening with the BRICS countries. And we would like to point out that this is also all connected. And the way it's connected, as we said, is global capitalism. And specifically, that global capitalism, which controls our governments, is capable of taking the decision-making processes from the local communities out of the hands of grassroots democratic organization and putting it into the hands of concentrated power so that, in the end, they create conflicts with each other the global elite, they fling mud at each other, as Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are doing right now, as Putin and Hollande are doing right now. And we, on the local level, are caught cleaning up the mess. But we can't clean up this mess unless we all organize together and work together. But we all see that the way of working together is through the government. And we see now that the government is going haywire. Governments all over the world, they're just going absolutely nuts. And my question now for the group is, how can we get our heads above the clouds, above the greenhouse gas emissions, and above the fog of war, so that we can see the problems on a global scale and work with each other and organize together? This opens up the discussion.
I think you're right in pointing out that there is essentially, under all of the conflicts, there is a clash over who controls the resources, and through resources, who controls the profits, and that sort of zero-sum game. If I'm not too incorrect in pointing it out that way. But what does this lead to? What does this lead to is that we need to understand that our interests as ordinary folk living at whatever part of the world are common, and they are not the interests of the moneyed elite that are presented to us in the terms, in whatever terms they're presented as in terms of nationalism, in terms of whatever limited consciousness of our identities, in terms of our belonging to a particular continent, a particular whatever breed of people. It's essentially it's a fight for survival, let's say, if I were to call it that way. And a fight for survival, a fight for our dignity, and a fight for a right to have a decent life on this planet for all of us. Minus the horrors of war, minus the horrors of human rights abuse, minus the horrors of degradation.
And I wanted to keep going with I wanted to add it to what you guys are talking about, with how it seems to me that at this very moment we're at a stage where, generally speaking, people are becoming more aware that this dream of, or rather this idea that we live in democracies, at least in the West, or even in second and so-called so let's call them southern nations, that they try to aspire to become like countries in the West, that this imagination is bullshit. Yeah.
To put it delicately.
Yeah, exactly. That people are rising up, that they're questioning authority, that they're not trusting the general mechanisms of democracy. I fear that because this is the case, and the elite, both the political and the capitalist class, because they're aware of this, they're very class conscious, they're aware that we are becoming skeptical of the way things are, that things at a global level politically are becoming very hot, because it is only when things get really hot that the powers that be can take power, retake the monopoly of resources in the world. They already have it, but I think they feel danger. And what do I mean? Let me be really specific. Give me a couple more minutes, Andrew. What I mean is that, like, when we talk about Russia, for example, I mean, I'm a little critical with the headlines that we gave, because I think they're very Western oriented. If we would take maybe Russian news, it would be very different. But what I see is that, for example, these proposed human rights violations against Russia in Aleppo, most definitely they're human rights violations. But they're not the only ones committing human rights violations. They're all committing human rights violations. And the fact that they're presenting this now is because it's in the interest of the West, of Europe and the US, right? With Aleppo, the US and the West, they lost a very important battle. Losing Aleppo was a very big deal for them, right? And why don't they, claim that, Saudi Arabia broke human rights violations for bombing a funeral home yesterday, or the day before yesterday, where they killed 140 people at a funeral. Now, no one wants to talk about that, right? So this hypocrisy, to me, when we look at that and we question this hypocrisy, we see, oh, why is there a double standard here? And what I see that's happening in Russia with the fact that, which we didn't talk about, the fact that Russia recently pulled out of this plutonium reduction agreement that they were with the U.S. That was like 3 days ago, reported by various sources, that they moved some nuclear missile capable weapons close to the Polish border, that they fired some missiles in the Pacific. And I see them doing this not because they're trying to not as an aggressive move, but to me they're flexing their muscles. Why? Because they are getting very much pushed by the West through economic sanctions, through these questions of human rights violations, through all these things, that they have to kind of show what they can do, what they could potentially do. There's a report by the Daily Mail yesterday that claims that Russia is pulling back is requesting all of their diplomats and other politicians around the world to pull back their family members back to Mother Russia. Yeah. I don't know if this is true, but if it is true, what does that mean? And so to me, this is all part of a larger game where the elites in the US are trying to capitalize on Syria because they want to cut Russian oil sales to Europe. Right? That's why Russia was very quick to make a deal with Erdogan to run a pipeline through Turkey to the Mediterranean. Very quick to do that. Why? Because they want to maintain their oil. What the US and Europe is trying to do is that they're trying to cut that. They're trying to take over Syria. That's, for me, how I understand it, why they wanted to get involved in Syria in the first place. Syria has the second largest cheap oil production in the world. That's the reason why they want to do it, because if they control Syria, they cut Russia, Russia stops making money with Europe. Yeah. So, to me, this in part is part of the bigger notion of, okay, the European and American elites want to capitalize over Russian elites, but at the same time, things are getting a lot hotter now because there is a crisis in democracy. No one believes this democracy that we have. I think most people know that it's bullshit, and the epitome of this bullshit is what we see on television every night with Trump and Clinton. Yeah, that's all I want to say.
Yeah, but not just that. I think the bankruptcy of this notion of democracy, just holding on to that point very quickly, is also seen in the rise of all this kind of nationalist right-wing movements as well.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's good that you made that point, because I was going to tie what Eddie was saying into the democracy, especially this thing about hypocrisy and these referendums that we've been seeing lately. Like people are starting to, some people, in the right and the mainstream as well, the mainstream left, are saying direct democracy doesn't work because they're seeing these referendums, and seeing that people are going against their own interests. But what a hypocrisy that really is, to only be given direct democracy on certain issues, certain very pressing issues, to more or less know, that these issues, where people stand on these issues, and not give us the democracy beforehand, so that we can actually take democracy into our own lives, so that when we do get democracy, we're allowed to destroy it for ourselves. We as in, the society. But we're not allowed to actually have the democracy to create a better society for ourselves. And to tie this back into global warming, this hurricane that hit Haiti and also hit Colombia, it prevented another referendum in Colombia, a very important referendum, from having the result that everyone expected it was going to have. It was a referendum between the Colombian government and FARC, which have been fighting against each other for over 50 years now. They finally wanted to have peace talks, and they left this referendum up for the people to decide whether they have peace talks. Now, of course, the question is, why don't we, if there was a hurricane, why don't we suspend such an important thing if we see it as important? But also, why do we buy this that we're allowed to talk, put peace up for a referendum? This is an argument that my good friend Franz made a while ago. Why do we put such great questions like peace up for a referendum? And the only answer can be that because the government knows that when it's put up for a referendum, then, we'll never actually get peace.
Yeah, like, why is peace debatable?
Yeah,
like,
why is peace
who does that
debatable?
want? I don't want peace. I want continual war for the rest of my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. For real. That's a good point. Good. Where do we go from here, guys?
Well, on the topic of global warming, really quick, it's interesting to me. We've known 30 some odd years that this poses a very significant threat to
1970s
to the planet. That's 40 some odd years then.
Yeah.
That this poses a very significant threat, and taking the U.S. perspective at the moment, during that time we've had, I don't know, maybe half of the time we had Democrat presidents, and the other half of the time we had Republican presidents, and what do we get from it? What have we got? What substantial steps have been taken? There's a small there's been a small increase in subsidies for alternative energy sources, but there's not been any decrease in subsidies for oil sources, and we've had 2, maybe 3 major wars for oil and resources. So it seems that although we know that this poses an imminent threat to potentially our survival as a species, the political process has yielded no concrete steps in the direction of solving global warming or mitigating global warming or in some way trying to, save ourselves from this impending doom. And I find that to be
Why do you think that is?
obscene. They're too much concerned with this sort of it's for me, it has to do with an inability to process long-term thinking. There's no well, of course, there's money and there's economics and there's all of this stuff that's involved, but the entire system is set up so that if we have to look at what we can do immediately now in order to win, that 51% that we need to keep our party in power, and we decrease the sophistication of the political dialogue to such a level where nobody is even able to think in the public sphere about things like, planning for long-term catastrophe, which is one of the major weaknesses of American-style democracy, in my mind. I don't think it necessarily is a weakness of democracy per se, but absolutely of American-style democracy. And of course, you're not wrong. Behind it, there's all of these economic concerns that drive and power our democracy and power the elites that control the politics within our country. But there's also a very pronounced inability to think and come up with long-term solutions to long-term problems.
I think we need to understand that this long-term inability, or this inability that you're talking about, it's built into the system. The system doesn't want us to have long-term change. It doesn't want us to be able to think, further than the next election or the next referendum. It's there in order to prevent long-term change. Not because the global elite can't see that, in the future, the things are going to suck. It's because the global elite, one, they don't care. But on the other hand, they realize that as soon as people understand, we can take things into our own hands, not only the things that we have to do cleaning up your mess, but also into the future, then that we don't actually need the elite at all. We have Navas and then...
Yeah, I think both of the points that you make in terms of the politicians being only restricted to the next election already presume a sort of a political business side point of view. But what I would say is that what interesting in this whole debate about global warming is that it's been so distant from people themselves. I think that's one of the major issues. It's largely been conducted by academics, right? It's only very recently, in the last maybe 10 years, come into the discourse on a popular level, and that too in wealthy northern states of the world, right? And in the poor South, it's still not much of a concern, right? Because we're pressed with other issues over there. So I would again, and then yes, one of the important points is that it's long term, right? Global warming is not just gonna hit us tomorrow. We could always buy time, and which is why we just push the problem away for the future generations to come. That is very responsible. But again, that's what's being done. Because I think, and more on a more abstract level, the problem is that we do not have any solutions to what to do with it. It's a classic public goods problem on a global scale, for which, in the contemporary understanding that we have in our modern sciences, in our modern societies, we really don't have the apparatus, the knowledge, the capability, the know-how to deal with this sort of problems that it raises for us, because it questions all of our modern institutions, be that of risk, be that of insurance, be that of industry, all of them. So I think we have global warming is a thing that it poses really big questions to us as a civilization, not just as people, but as civilization in terms of our modes of thinking, in terms of our modes of living, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to go off with that, it does question our institutions, and to me it shows me that it questions just what interests our institutions have. It seems to me that the interest of our institutions is not for the general population, but it's to maintain certain relationships with the general population. And what climate change affects is the least amongst us. And I think just our history, it's always been one of oppressed and oppressor. And the oppressed, they're going to keep getting oppressed, especially with climate change. And the oppressor is not going to give a damn if they could keep making money off it. If they could maintain their status of oppressor, they're not going to care about what's going to happen with climate change. That's why I think nothing has happened. Nothing has changed. We all know, we've known that climate change is a big problem. It's going to pose big problems, but nothing has changed because we don't have any power to actually do something, and we have to get that power.
Yeah, right. And Andrew, you mentioned that okay, well, my brain just shut that part off. But okay, good. So I hear oftentimes people saying that the American political process or the American political system is broken. I think that's wrong. I think the American political system is not broken. I think it's working exactly the way that it's evolved to work. It's working exactly correctly. And Trump, he's not some crazy aberration. Right. He's the logical conclusion of the way that this system has been set up.
Yeah. We didn't want to talk about Trump.
We didn't want to talk about Trump, so we don't need to talk about it.
But likes to talk about it.
Trump. But he's not even the worst.
I think you're exactly right, Chell. If I may jump in, I want to lead us back to the question. What we have is how can we understand this? I think we've got that, but also what can we do now? And I think we've said on previous podcasts, start making your own podcasts, get organized. But what we mean is get together, start working on a local level with each other, not just going out, having fun, but also in political stuff as well. Start getting together. It doesn't have to be a podcast. You can start, if you have a problem in your community, you go tackle that. You can go start a soup kitchen. Just start talking with each other. Start engaging these issues on a local level.
Yeah, start cooperating, make decisions democratically. What does that mean? And then that implies things that we never thought about, I think, and things that we were never taught in school. Like, for example, in school, why do they teach us to compete with one another? Why do they teach us to cooperate with each other? Something that's very important for democracy. right? To cooperation, these kind of skills that we need to understanding, right? When someone talks to you, to understand, to be patient, to listen with intent, these kind of things, these kind of questions that our societies just don't teach us. I think we all agree here, is that we have to kind of promote these kind of values and start doing them. And you can start with your friends. And that's what the nice thing is. That's what we're doing. Hopefully you can join us.